Here are a couple of statements that you've probably heard before, but they have no heritage. It's good if you don't care about value retention. Grand Seiko is superior to Rolex. Hublot is trash. The 50 Fathoms is a must-own watch. They're not part of the Holy Trinity. It's just an homage brand. Flippers are the worst. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's dive in. No heritage. Blancpain 1735, Vacheron 1755, Patek 1839, Rolex 1905. Contrast that with Hublot 1980, Christopher Ward 2004, Formex 1998. One of the statements you'll hear when people talk about watches is heritage. They talk about brands that have been around for some period of time that gives them some level of seal of approval. Rolex has that seal of approval. So too do AP, Patek, Chapek. Christopher Ward, Formex, and Ferrer don't. The heritage statements sometimes get thrown out as a slur to deride and put down other brands. The lack of heritage invariably gets equated with a lack of value, a lack of quality, and a lack of desirability. I've seen this comment more than once when reading or watching videos about brands like Christopher Ward. But is the statement even fair or valid, justified even? No, it's not. I'm not talking about Christopher Ward specifically here, but young brands in general. Heritage says nothing and everything at the same time. Think of your favorite American football or baseball or soccer team. Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees, Manchester United, Barcelona. These teams have heritage in the sense that they've been around for a long time and they've historically won a lot of championships. Just like Mercedes has been around for a long time, making excellent cars and still doing so today. Patek has been around for a long time producing iconic watches. But think again of the Boston Red Sox or Manchester United. What does that history say about their performance today? Largely speaking, nothing. Manchester United, the Red Sox, their performance today rests on the current leadership and the current employees. The same goes for Patek, AP, and Christopher Ward. The fact that a brand's existed for over 100 years in no way guarantees that what they do tomorrow will be of high quality, successful, or even memorable. There is, however, though, the value of a long-established brand when it comes to recruiting, development of talent, and cash flow. There's a reason Switzerland remains dominant in the world of watchmaking. That's because there are so many watchmakers in Switzerland. At some point, the locus of power just draws talent to Switzerland. If you want to work with watches, odds are Switzerland is the place to be. That or Glashütte. If you want to make it as the best basketball player in the world, the NBA is the place to be. And in the same way, just like the people that want a job at McKinsey or Deloitte or some other, talent wants to work for Patek, for Rolex, for Lange. So to the extent that Patek continues to be run well, they will continue to attract top talent and will perpetuate their position. But it doesn't by default mean that the people working at Christopher Ward are incompetent. The talents that think that Patek is stuffy, that Rolex is overly conservative, that Omega is uninspired, they look for someone different to work for, someone smaller to make a bigger impact. And brands like Fears or Ferrer or Christopher Ward can hire good people. People that Christopher Ward have had on their design team for the 12 were also on the design team for the Chapek and Tartique. That's not exactly a bad CV. Secondly, some say heritage guarantees that the brand will be around in 10 or 20 or 50 years when you need new parts for your watch. Longevity and staying power are referenced as components of that heritage story, which is complete nonsense. All I have to say is Universal Genève. They were great and then they disappeared. Just because Patek exists today in no way guarantees that they will exist tomorrow. Is there some layer of inherent risk when buying a Formex that Formex or some other brand might not be around in 10 years? Of course there is. But there's a tendency to overstate the importance of legacy when assessing future staying power. Hublot might not have a strong heritage, but they'll still be around in 50 years, potentially at least. So yes, heritage brands can likely hire really good people and remain dominant, but any brand with or without heritage, I feel, should be only evaluated on the quality of their current products. What they did before means nothing. At least not objectively. Emotionally, sure, I buy that completely. You like the story of having something that's been around for 200 years. But from a quality perspective, it's just not true as a given. Just think of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. They're gone, and that makes the Patriots far less intimidating than they were 10 years ago. Value retention. This is a complicated one. People worry about if their watch will hold value after they purchase it. And here's the harsh reality. No, it won't. That's by far the rule you should live by with literally 99% of all watches out there. There are some Rolexes, some Pateks, and some APs that maintain their value, but generally throw a dart at a watch display case, and whether you hit a Blancpain, Breguet, Omega, or Longines, or a Formax, that watch is going to be worth less the instant you walk out of the store. Having said that, I understand why people are occupied with this value conversation. If you buy several watches and you're not made of cash, you're likely selling watches to partially finance other watches. The curb tax is important in that regard. The value of the watch when it gets stolen is also important. What are you going to get back from your insurance? The retail price or some depreciated amount? There's also those that aren't massive collectors but want to buy a watch, and if they someday want to sell, well, they want to feel that they're not throwing massive amounts of money out the window. I get it. I'm not oblivious to that fact. It does matter to me too. I'm also not made of money. I can't just spend, without a care like Ed Sheeran or John Mayer. My perspective though is this. Whether I'm looking at a watch at retail or from the secondary market, I consider the price I pay up front. Small digression, but about a little over a year ago, I bought a new car. It was an EV. I considered Tesla, but for all sorts of reasons, I don't like Teslas, so that was out of the question. So I bought another brand that was a little bit more expensive. 1 month later, Tesla lowered their prices by 20-25% or thereabouts. Pretty much everybody else followed suit, to some extent at least. To be honest, that sucked. But at the end of the day, I made the calculation based on the price I paid. The curb tax on an EV is terrible, and even more terrible now. And that's kind of where I am, but even more distilled when it comes to watches. These things on our arms are toys, and bar a few very wealthy collectors and a few people that have been in the game so long that they've turned a profit on, vintage Rolexes in perfect condition, most of us should accept that watch collecting is a losing proposition from a value perspective. It's not that you should ignore the resale value, but generally I'd say you need to consider the price you pay up front. Are you willing to pay that amount? Is that amount worth it to you? Because it's a luxury, it's not a necessity. If it's worth it to you, buy it. If not, then don't. Grand Seiko is superior to Rolex. I think I'm going to do a full video on this at some point because I think it's a fascinating conversation. Short version, yes, Grand Seiko is superior to Rolex. Grand Seiko is excellent value. Their movements are technically better. Their movement finishing is of a higher standard. Their case and dial finishing is infinitely better. The bracelets are more often than not great overall, but overall, Grand Seiko is technically better than Rolex. That's my position at least, and I know somebody can probably have a different opinion in the comments, and that's totally cool. That's just where I am. I'd even go so far as to say that Grand Seiko shouldn't be compared with Rolex. I think a more apt comparison is with JLC. JLC are the technical watchmaker's watchmaker. They are much like Grand Seiko praised for their technical prowess. This doesn't change the fact that I would likely prefer many Rolex models over many Grand Seiko models. I just like the designs more. They're softer, they're more flowing, they're less engineering forward, which just has never really spoken to me. But compared to Rolex on a technical level, Grand Seiko is superior. Go ahead, kill me in the comments now. Hublot is trash. The brand everybody loves to hate. Why? Because it's the Jean-Claude Beaver brand. Because it's the brand that started out as the footballer's brand. It has no heritage. $8,500 for a basic classic fusion with a Solita movement. It's a brand that's all marketing and has very little substance, at least too many. Weirdly, in recent months, I've been hearing more and more watch experts speak more positively about Hublot. It's a weird shift that I've been noticing because nothing has really changed, so I wonder why that shift is occurring. But that's a digression from the core question. Broadly speaking, I don't think Hublot is trash. A Hublot Sam Ross Tourbillon is no more trash than an Audemars Piguet Spider-Man. Hublot does some cool stuff when it comes to ceramic and sapphire and other specialized case materials. It takes skill. They also do a decent job of skeletonization, and in some high-end models, their movements and complications are not necessarily world-class, but they are comparable to some other high-end brands. I think a lot of their designs are garish and over the top, and bar a few models like the ceramic Big Blue Big Bang, They are generally not my cup of tea. But trash? No, I don't really think so. They're a little bit overpriced, yeah, sure, but so is AP and so is Jaeger Ultra. Hublot's biggest problem is how heavily they lean into marketing and the kind of marketing that they do. They do not pretend to be a watch enthusiast brand. They sell high-end watches to people that can afford them, and they are not shy about it, and that puts people off. It comes off as superficial, fake, hype, fashion. Choose a word that has negative connotations. Hublot likely embodies it. But tell me that if you're considering a IWC Big Pilot Mojave in sand ceramic, that the Hublot Big Bang ceramic doesn't do a lot of the same for a comparable price and a comparable technology on the inside. They're not trash, they're just brand and fashion forward. If that bugs you, then fine. If not, they do have some watches that are worth considering. You'll likely pay a premium, but that's kind of the case for all brands in the LVMH portfolio. The 50 Fathoms is a must-own watch. If you love watches and you love dive watches, you'll likely have paid some level of attention to the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. It's the OG dive watch, the diver's dive watch. It's iconic, it's impeccably finished, it's got a stellar movement, and it comes from, in quotation marks, a heritage brand. But it's too big, it's too thick. The base model has a 430 date position, which is good for all sorts of ISO reasons, but it doesn't look good. Ignoring for a moment the Act 3 model, which is that tad smaller, that tad more refined, the 50 Fathoms just isn't that compelling a purchase for many people. Although Swatch apparently is selling a lot of them after the collab with Swatch. Still though, people want a 37 to 39mm dive watch like the SJE 093, the Blancpain 54, or the Glashütte diver. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms has, in my view, failed to evolve sufficiently over time. It's still hugely popular with a niche in the community. Whenever a limited edition comes out, they usually sell out. And I'm honest enough to admit that some hypocritical part of me would like some version of a no-rad dial 50 Fathoms. But for the general watch owner, the first-time buyer, the casual enthusiast, the 50 Fathoms might as well be a 49mm Sylvester Stallone Panerai. It's just not compelling as a product for most people. The Holy Trinity, Patek, Vacheron, AP, the OG watchmakers. The origins of this Holy Trinity moniker are not entirely clear. It wasn't a vote, it wasn't an award given at some point where experts from around the world sat down and collectively decided to award this title to those three brands based on some level of objective criteria. The reality is that these three brands up to, through, and past the quartz crisis survived, and the Holy Trinity moniker kind of was just applied to them. Rolex was never high horology and still isn't. JLC at the time were more of a movement maker and other brands were languishing. Lange and Söhne were only re-established late in the last century, so for a while they didn't even exist. So it may have been apt at some time. But today, I don't think the term's useful in any meaningful way. If the Holy Trinity term covers quality, desirability, craftsmanship and finishing, then a whole lot of others need to be considered. Lange, Chapek, Chopard, they all live up to those criteria. JLC, Girard-Perregaux, Breguet, they're all older than Patek. And then take a look at the three brands themselves. What exactly do they have in common? That they're old and expensive? If I was mean to Vacheron, and this will hurt Vacheron enthusiasts, we're dealing with a slightly bland maker of high-end dress watches. They are the also-rans of the Holy Trinity. The overseas is largely accepted as popular, primarily because nobody could get their hands on a Royal Oak or a Nautilus. But what about AP? Sure, they make technically impressive complications, but what in their product lineup speaks to their history? The Spider-Man? The Offshores? The AP Alex or the Cactus Jack? Whatever historical significance there is to the brand is well hidden behind a massive focus on popularity, pop culture, and fashion-forward collabs. AP has very little in common with Patek or Vacheron. Of the three, Patek is the only one that truly embodies the, oldness that the Holy Trinity moniker insinuates. It's a little bit long-winded on my part, but basically all I'm saying is that Holy Trinity is an irrelevant way of categorizing these three very diverse watch brands and excluding also a whole host of other brands that are just as competent, old, and desirable. It's just a homage brand. Pagani, Steinhardt, Devosa, Invicta, San Martin. They are all homage brands to one degree or another. Some make almost carbon copies of classic or current models from brands like Rolex, Omega, and Audemars Piguet. Others do more interpretations. Some are very closely aligned, or others just have, resemblances. Some people might even put a brand like Christopher Ward in there. It's not entirely unjustified. Some of their watches do have design cues from other watches, but I'd say, in my opinion, that those are less so homages and more taking inspiration from other brands. If we stick with the homage-centric brands, there's not a problem with them. None of them are fakes. None of them say Rolex on the dial. Some of them are really well made. None are going to be on par with the contemporary originals, but with modern production technology, they get surprisingly close as long as you don't pull out the magnifying glass and the movement timer. For the most part, they are as solid as the price would suggest. I've said this before. If you're buying it to scratch an itch where you actually want the real model, then you're likely wasting your money. But if you like the design and feel 10K for a Rolex is unjustified, then by all means go for it. If you like, you like. Additionally, and I haven't said this before, but it does warrant being said, because it's a homage, you might be tempted to lower your standards in terms of quality. Don't. There are Rolex homages out there with terrible movements and stamped clasps that are horribly overpriced. And there are Rolex homages with decent Solita level movements, machined clasps, and even easy adjust mechanisms. Apply the same quality standards to those homage watches as you would any other watch from any other brand in a similar price range. Don't pay a premium for lower quality just because it looks like a Rolex. And don't buy the cheapest homage. Get something decent. And one last thing. Take them off the bracelet and throw them on a NATO or a leather strap. Especially the vintage homages really benefit from a different strap option. Flippers are the worst. Yes and no. If you just generally prefer capitalism over whatever alternatives there are out there, then there's going to be an incentive for people to make money on things that they can make money on. Limited supply, excess demand equals flippers. Is it cool? No. Would I prefer that the watches only got into the hands of the people that really wanted them? Yes. But I can't really fault people for essentially scalping as long as it's not illegal. So it's just a consequence. It's over for the moment anyway. There's very little money to be made on watches nowadays, bar a few Rolexes. There we are. That's it for this time. Let me know what you think are silly positions that are worth challenging. Put it in the comments below. And also let me know if you like this kind of content. Like, subscribe. Cheers.